Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making Peel a Pound Cabbage Soup. It's a new year and lots of folks are trying to get healthy this year and maybe lose some weight. It's that time of year. And while this soup is this recipe is associated with diets, it is a very healthy recipe. So I thought I would share it, and we'll talk about the ingredients in it and variations of it and kind of talk about that crazy diet it's associated with a little bit too. It has a lot of vegetables in it, and pretty much it has what are kind of called neutral foods, which means they have very low calories and they take about as much energy to process as it will burn the calories in it processing it. So that's why it works so well as a diet soup. But anyway, it's cabbage soup. Obviously you need cabbage, and I have chopped up an entire head of green cabbage. I also have 2 green peppers that I chopped up, 3 stalks of celery, 2 onions, and about 5 or 6 garlic toes, about half of a clove of garlic. It's just kind of up to you how much you want in it. And all this stuff is up to you how much you want in it. You can put as much or as little as you want, and you can chop it as big or as small as you want. Like if you chop the celery bigger, then you would have big chunks of celery in your soup and you would have more texture to it. So that's kind of up to you. And it kind of has a tomato base. Now you can use crushed tomatoes, you can use diced tomatoes, you can use whole tomatoes, you can use fresh tomatoes, canned tomatoes, frozen tomatoes, whatever you got. You can even just use tomato juice. That's up to you again too. But try to do the 100% tomato, not tomato with other stuff added in it. So let's get some heat going here. And we'll talk about amounts and, like I said, different varieties and stuff. Now, you can literally throw everything in your pot all at once. I like to throw my vegetables in first, or these are kind of seasoned vegetables here. The onions and the peppers and the garlic and the celery, they all add a ton of flavor to it. Cabbage does have a flavor, but it doesn't have a real overpowering flavor. It tastes more like the stuff that it's mixed with. So, and I like these vegetables really tender. If you don't, add everything all at once. I'm just going to dump these in my pot. You're going to need a pretty big pot for this, and most of us probably don't have a big enough pot to get all of this in, but your cabbage is going to kind of cook down. So if it doesn't all fit in your pot at one time, it's not a big deal. You can kind of pile it up and just sit the lid on top of it, or you can let it cook down a little and then add the rest of the cabbage. Just whatever. It doesn't all have to fit in your pot at once. And you can, of course, cut this in half. This is going to make a really big pot full. It's supposed to store in the refrigerator in an airtight container for about a week, so that, you can make it and eat on it for a week and not have to make another pot. Obviously, chopping all these vegetables is a little bit of work. You can also add carrots to this and green beans. I would think broccoli or cauliflower would be okay in it because they're, again, kind of neutral calorie foods. It takes more energy to process it than the calories in the food. And that's what you're looking for in this. You don't want to put potatoes or anything like that in it if you're doing it for a diet. This recipe came from a heart doctor in the 70s, and I'm pretty sure it was in the 70s, but he prescribed it to his patients who needed to lose a lot of weight before surgery. And I remember my mom and her sisters and her friends all making this and eating it. My poor mom, she was always on a diet. I think her whole life she was on a diet. And this was one of the things that they thoroughly enjoyed because it does taste good. It's got all this flavor in it. And you can season it a lot of different ways. You can add beef or chicken stock to it, beef or chicken bouillon if you'd like. I don't do that when I make it because I'm going to give you some other uses for this. You can use this as like a stew starter if you want to. If you're not on a diet, this makes a great stew starter, and you can just add a little bit of leftover meat in it and then change it to whatever flavor your little bit of leftover meat is. And this is a really good summertime recipe when you're starting to get vegetables out of your garden. You can use a whole lot of them in this. I'm going to go ahead and add my tomatoes. Now, tomatoes, you want, like I said, you can use any kind you want, but you want anywhere from one of these big 28-ounce cans to 2 of the 28-ounce cans, or if you're using the regular size cans in this much, you would want 2 to 4 of those. It just kind of depends on how much tomato you want and whether you use the crushed or the diced or the whole. That's, you know, going to give you, again, a different texture, and it's up to you what texture you want in your soup. Now, you're going to have to add, if you don't add broth to it, you're going to have to add a little water to it. And it's up to you if you want the broth or the water and the bouillon. And it does work with chicken or beef. In this much, if you were using like bouillon cubes, you would want to use 5 or 6 of them. But I'm just going to add water to mine because I want my soup base to be the tomatoes and the vegetables, kind of, well, a vegetable broth is what I want in mine. But, you know, it's whatever you want. And like I said, if you want your celery bigger, cut it in bigger pieces. It will give it more texture. You can cut your onions in bigger pieces. My mom absolutely loved onions. And when she made this, she also absolutely loved bell peppers. She would put like 3 or 4 pounds of onions in it. I mean, she put a lot of onions in it. And she put probably twice as many peppers as what I have in it. And that's perfectly fine. If you want to add more onions and peppers, add more. Now I'm going to put the lid on this and kind of let those vegetables start to cook a little bit before I add my cabbage, because I want to keep my cabbage just a tiny bit crunchy. That's just the way I like it. That's the texture I prefer. If you want your cabbage softer, go ahead and throw it in now. Let's kind of talk about spicing this up. You can add any spices to this you want to. You can make it hot and spicy, like use Mexican spices, cayenne peppers, hot peppers, that kind of stuff. And you can add fresh hot peppers to it if you want to. You could go for an Italian kind of flavor. You could do oregano or just a mixed Italian spice blend. Somewhere around here I had something like that. Yeah, right here. Just some kind of mixed spices that kind of have an Italian flavor. Now, if you want to do a dried spice like this or oregano, I would go ahead and add it now, because you're going to want those dried spices to cook so you don't have like dried chunks of leaf in your finished soup. And I think I am going to put a little bit of this in there and go ahead and add it now. This is a lot of soup, and I can't really tell you how much seasoning to put in it. You're just going to have to kind of do it to taste. I'm going to put about 2 teaspoons of this in, and this is just a mixed Italian spice. Salt and pepper, that's going to depend on what you're seasoning it with, and also whether or not your tomatoes have salt in them. The original recipe called for a teaspoon of salt, I think. I put a little in mine and then I taste it. And that's what I would recommend doing, especially if you're doing broth or bouillon, because that always has some salt in it. Pepper, I start with at least a teaspoon and then I taste it, because it is all to taste. Like I said, you can do cayenne pepper. I usually add, even though it's got fresh garlic and fresh onion in it, I usually add some garlic powder and some onion powder, because the powder does do a little bit different thing with the flavor than the fresh chop does. But that's up to you. Again, you don't have to. And I do about a teaspoon of garlic powder and about a tablespoon of onion powder. Don't really measure it, it's to taste. And you can add a little bit of hot pepper in with that if you want to. I'm not going to. You can use chili powder. If you are using a chili powder though, again, make sure you taste it before you add salt, because most chili powder is about 50% salt. Another thing you can add in this is you can add in the soup mixes, like an onion soup mix that has a lot of flavor in it, and a lot of the recipes call for that. I usually don't put any kind of mix in it like that. I just have the onions and the onion powder. But if you want to add an onion soup mix into it to give it more flavor and make it a little bit easier, you go right ahead. Okay, I'm just going to let my peppers and onions and stuff boil for a few minutes before I add my cabbage. Not too long, like 5 or 6 minutes at the most, because I like them a little more tender than my cabbage. If you like the crunchy peppers and onions, you don't have to do that. You can throw it all in the pot at one time. It's just kind of a matter of taste preferences, and that's the same way with the size that you chop your vegetables up. If you want big crunchy pieces of celery and peppers and onions and stuff, chop it up in great big pieces instead of little pieces. Now, I also like to be able to get my cabbage on my spoon, so I kind of chunk it up in pieces about like this. But if you chop the cabbage up really, really small, it's kind of going to be like a pot of rice almost that is seasoned, however you chose to season it. So you can chop your cabbage up really fine, about the size of rice, and cook it, and it will give you a totally different soup. It's just up to you what you want. Now, I do like I said, the bigger chunks of cabbage, and I like the smaller pieces of the other vegetables. But you change it to suit your taste. And sometimes I make it different just so I have something different. And you can do that too. You can vary it, and you can vary the spices in it. Sometimes you can make it hot, and sometimes you can give it more of that Italian flavor with the oregano or the mixed Italian spices or things like that. And add a little mushroom in it, or whatever flavor pretty much you like, you can put in it. The deal with this soup is that you are supposed to be able to lose between 10 and 15 pounds in a week if you eat this soup every day and you have just like fresh fruits and vegetables with it. Now, I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a doctor, and I don't recommend a rapid weight loss plan, but there's so much fiber in this fruit, or in this soup, and so few calories. I can't imagine not losing weight if this was most of your diet. But again, I don't recommend that. I'm not in a position to recommend that. But we all could make healthier choices, and this is a really, really healthy soup. If you just replaced your canned soup with this soup, you would probably feel a whole lot better, and you would probably lose weight because it doesn't have any fat in it at all and very few calories, and it doesn't have any additives in it. Now, if you add the canned broth or you add bouillon to it, you're probably going to end up putting some additives in there, or those soup packets or something, and that's why I don't add anything to mine. If I go to all the trouble to gather all these fresh fruits or all these fresh vegetables, I don't know why I keep saying fruit, but if I gather all these fresh vegetables and I chop them up and I take the time to cook them, I don't want to put additives in it. If you're not on a diet, if you're just looking for some healthy recipes, this is a really good one, and this makes a good stew starter. You can start with this, and you can add a little bit of, if you've got leftover pork roast, if you've got leftover chicken, whether it's, however you've cooked it, you can chop it up and add it into this. And if you're not on a diet, you could add potatoes or noodles to it and turn it into a stew and make more of a non-diet meal out of it. It's, like I said, it's a really good starter recipe to add a lot of stuff to. And especially if you're making a big batch like this, You could add beef and chicken and pork to it through the week. Maybe if you've got some frozen, you could take out a little bit of frozen stuff, or even some of the canned stuff. I know right now fresh beef just is not to be found in stores pretty much everywhere. So if you happen to have some of the canned stuff in your pantry, you can take out the canned beef and the canned chicken, and you can add it to this with some noodles or some potatoes, and you can make a stew out of it and have a meal that's not a diet meal, but it's still very healthy. So that's something to think about. And yes, I know the canned meat's not as healthy as the fresh meat, but like I said, right now we're in times where you can't necessarily get everything fresh. And I hope y'all have stocked your pantries up over the summer while things were a little more readily available, because they are now saying that we are in for 12 to 18 months of continued shortages. And with winter weather and other things going on, I'm afraid it's going to get a whole lot worse. So I really, really, truly hope that y'all have all put back some stuff and you have your pantry stocked with some of that stuff that you can pull out when you can't get fresh stuff. So let's see if this is boiling. Yeah, it's boiling, and I'm sure it has been for a few minutes there while we were talking. Now, how much liquid is in this, again, is kind of a matter of your personal taste. How much broth or how much water you add to it, or even, like I said, tomato juice will work in it if you want to keep it 100% vegetable, but maybe you don't want to put the water in it. With all these vegetables in here, though, the celery and the onions and the garlic and all that stuff, that broth is going to have plenty of flavor if you just do the water. If you're adding chicken or you're adding beef or something to it, though, a little bit of bouillon goes a long way in there. Okay, so now I'm just going to add my chopped cabbage. And like I said, you could do this all at once. It just kind of depends on what you want. And mine's going to fit in here pretty well. You can, if your pot's really, really full, there's no need to stir this up and sling your cabbage all over your countertop or all over your stove. Just kind of knock it down there so that you can get the lid on it, and the steam will cook the cabbage, and then you can stir it up without getting it all over your kitchen and all over your stove. And I am going to add a tiny bit more water to it. This probably makes about 3 cups I've got in here, just because I've got all that cabbage in it, and I may still have to add a little bit more. So just put your lid on it, and now you're just going to let it sit there and cook for about 20 minutes. That'll give the cabbage plenty of time to get tender, and if you don't want your cabbage that tender, cook it for about 10 minutes. Again, it's just up to you. It's a matter of what taste you prefer and what texture you prefer. Okay, our soup's been cooking for maybe 10 minutes or so. Now I'm going to stir my cabbage down in all of my broth, my tomatoes and everything, and kind of let it get some flavor in it before it completely finishes cooking. The cabbage is already starting to get a little bit tender, but not super soft. And you could even eat it at this point if you liked your cabbage crunchy. But again, that's up to you. This soup goes by a lot of different names. It's called A Pound Cabbage Soup. It's called Doctor's Cabbage Soup. Sometimes it's called Military Diet. And there are quite a few varieties. Like I said, some of them have the onion soup in them, and some of them have bouillon in them, and some of them have broth in them. I looked everywhere to try to find the original doctor's recipe, and I'm not convinced I found it, but I really don't think that the original recipe had the broth in it. It doesn't make sense that it would, because even way back then, the canned broth had stuff added to it. Now, if you had some homemade broth, certainly that wouldn't hurt it any, and I wouldn't hesitate in the least bit to put that in there. I'm going to add a little bit more water to mine, which is going to make about 4 cups of water I've put in mine so far, because you can see it don't have a whole lot of broth in it. But you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to make your soup all watered down, especially if you're doing it like I am and you're keeping it just a vegetable soup. While we're waiting on our soup to finish, I want to share James 1:5 with you. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. I think wisdom is something that we all kind of tend to overlook. If you remember the story of Solomon, when God made Solomon king, Solomon didn't ask for riches or power or long life. Solomon asked for wisdom, and that pleased God so much that he made Solomon the wisest, richest, most powerful king ever. It says that ever had been and ever will be. And he also gave him long life. And there are a lot of verses in the Bible that talk about the value of wisdom and the joy of a wise son and the burden of a foolish son and things like that. And out of all the things that we could ask for from God, I think wisdom is that thing that he gives most generously and most freely, and it makes him the happiest to give it. I mean, certainly as a parent, I know when our children make wise choices that not only help them, but also help other people. It brings us joy as parents. And we truly get pleasure from seeing our children behave in a wise manner. And I think God, it also enjoys seeing his children behave in a wise manner, and that's why it pleases him so when we ask for wisdom. And we have verses that tell us to seek God first and his kingdom. So he's telling us, look for wisdom first, and then he'll give us everything else. So no matter what it is, what need you have in your life, ask him for wisdom first. Ask him for wisdom concerning your situation. Because once we have wisdom, the rest of it will follow. It's just kind of one of those little thoughts that I thought you might enjoy hearing about and maybe pondering. Let's see how our soup's doing. Now, when it's finished cooking, you do want to taste it, and you want to adjust your salt and your pepper and any other spices you put in it. I wouldn't add in any dried leaf spices like Italian seasonings and oregano right at the end, because they're going to tend to stay dry until you've reheated it a time or two, and you're going to be eating chunks of leaves, and that's never good. Nobody enjoys that. But I think our soup is about ready to serve here. It looks like our cabbage is tender. And how long you cook it is up to you. 20 to 30 minutes is generally about long enough to get all the vegetables tender enough. But if you want them more tender, you can cook them longer. Or if you want them crunchier, don't cook it as long. And how much liquid is in it, again, that's up to you. If you're a real brothy soup person, put more liquid in there, whether you're using just water or you're using the broth or bouillon, whatever you're using. Adjust the liquid to suit your taste. I know Alex, she likes a lot more liquid in her soup. Brett was never fond of like really, when I made him soups, it had to be more like stews. And even his chili, he didn't like very much liquid in it. So, you know, just adjust it to suit your taste. Not everybody likes a really brothy soup. So if you don't put so much in it. And like I said, this makes it's a very healthy soup, but it makes a good stew starter too. So if you're not looking to lose weight, add in some meat and maybe some pasta or some potatoes and make it a more hearty meal. Turn it into a stew. If you want to lose some weight, I would definitely say that this is a good recipe for losing weight, but like I said, I'm not a dietitian. I'm not recommending a diet. And personally, I think losing 15 pounds in a week is probably a bit fast. But if you want to lose weight and you want to get healthy, this is a good recipe for that. So whether you're losing weight or you're getting healthy or you're looking for something to throw your garden vegetables into, this is a good recipe. It's been around for years. It tastes good without adding anything else to it. And it's just good food. Give this one a try. Hang on to the recipe, do some add-ins, change the flavor, fix it to suit your taste, texture-wise, how much liquid you like in it, what size you like your vegetables. All that stuff changes it totally. I want to thank you so much for joining us again in the Hillbilly Kitchen. If you haven't already, please don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. And until next time, remember to put God first.